24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the issues that we need to be looking at in depth. Keeping me company today is journalist Charlie Peters, and here's what we'll be discussing. Is Rishi Rich really a man of the people? Millions up and down the country are plunged into financial despair as Tories come out swinging against the Chancellor's lack of support for those struggling the most in a spiralling cost of living crisis. And Biden is in Europe to get NATO's act together. But is it too little, too late? Can America help to prevent the West sliding into decline while a dangerous new world order takes over? We've got expert analysis for you. Plus, when is a border not a border? The pesky Northern Irish Protocol is once again creating a headache, this time over visa waivers between Ireland and the UK. We'll go live to Belfast for the latest. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. You can email me, it's gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Thank you, Alex. It's 2:01. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. US President Joe Biden has announced a joint game plan with the EU to reduce Europe's dependency on Russian energy. The US will provide the EU with at least 15 billion additional cubic metres of liquefied natural gas by the end of the year. During a press conference in Brussels, President Biden said the EU shouldn't be subsidising Putin's brutal attack on Ukraine.
I know that eliminating Russian gas will have costs for Europe, but it's not only the right thing to do from a moral standpoint, it's going to put us on a much stronger strategic footing.
Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says a humanitarian corridor will be opened out of the besieged city of Mariupol today for those with access to a car. Tens of thousands of civilians are believed to be trapped in the southern port city with little food, water, medicine, power and heat. It's been reported 300 people were killed when Russia bombed a theatre sheltering women and children in Mariupol last week. The UN Refugee Agency says around 3.7 million people have fled Ukraine since the conflict began. The British Ministry of Defence says Ukraine has reoccupied towns and defensive positions up to 21 miles east of the capital, Kyiv. It also says that in the south of Ukraine, Russian forces heading to Odessa are being slowed by logistic issues and Ukrainian resistance. Alexander Nosachenko is a Ukrainian businessman turned soldier. He told us why he's fighting on the front line.
What happens to those who cannot escape, who have no means to travel or to immigrate to Europe, those will be ultimately killed by Russians. That's crystal clear. And then the big question mark was, why was I doing this, training for all these 6 years? Probably for the moment like this.
The Transport Secretary has called on the P&O Ferries boss to resign after he sacked 800 workers without notice, replacing them with cheaper agency staff. CEO Peter Hebblethwaite admitted the new crews are being paid below the UK's minimum wage on international routes, but he insists it is legal. Grant Shapps told GB News his actions were unacceptable, adding that he'll change the law so the company must pay minimum wage.
Was brazen, breathtaking, arrogant as he sat there and told Parliament, we decided it would be better to break the law. We are going to make it absolutely clear that is unacceptable. They are going to need to do a U-turn because I'm going to come forward next week with a package of measures to Parliament, which will require ships that sail from here to be on a regular route, applying the regular route, to be paying the minimum wage.
Grant Shapps there speaking to us earlier. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the Taliban's decision to shut school doors to girls in Afghanistan is unjustifiable. The foreign ministers of the UK, US, Canada, France, Italy, Norway and the High Representative of the European Union have all condemned the decision in a joint statement. They say denying girls' right to an education in Afghanistan contradicts the Taliban's previous assurances. Nargis Nehan is a former Afghan politician in Kabul. She told GB News there are millions of girls living as prisoners in Afghanistan.
Living, you don't know what you're living for. You're not treated as a human being anymore. You don't have access to the very, very basic rights. Even for small decisions such as going to the doctor, you have to have a mail company. So as a human being, you don't have any independency. You don't have any freedom. You cannot earn for yourself. You cannot decide for yourself. And the future seems very dark and bleak, and you don't see anybody around trying to help you out.
The Irish Foreign Minister has been removed from stage in Belfast due to a security alert. Footage shows the moment Simon Coveney's speech was interrupted after a suspicious device was found in a hijacked van in the venue's car park. It's reported the van's driver was held at gunpoint. Mr. Coveney said he was saddened and frustrated by the incident. In Wales, the legal requirement to wear a face covering in shops and on public transport will end on Monday, as well as self-isolation after a positive COVID test. All legal restrictions were set to be removed, but First Minister Mark Drakeford said rising community transmission and hospitalisations means some rules have to stay.
The rapid spread of infections caused by BA2 means that we need to retain some of these protections in law for a little while longer. And at the same time, we will continue to issue authoritative advice to help people take those steps which protect us all.
Mark Drakeford there. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Alex, and we need to talk about.
I am sure many of you will know the harrowing anxiety, the fear of not knowing how to make ends meet, the desperate panic as your mind races at night. Millions of people up and down the country are now gripped by guilt of not being able to provide for their family as bills stack up, putting that item back on the supermarket shelf and heading to the reduced section instead. The burning sense of injustice that however hard you work, the sums just don't add up. While for some people, it all comes so sickeningly easy. This energy crisis is not your fault. So how are you expected to suddenly pay bills 4 times higher? Oh, it's fine for people who could afford solar panels on their roofs as they polish their electric cars and smugly talk about saving the planet. But that's okay. This government said they'd level up. That for people like you, hard work would pay off, where no child will be left behind. That is what they told you. But was it all a big lie? As the cost of living crisis, the likes of which this country has never seen since the 1950s, start to grip the country, the headlines reflect mounting discontent among Tory ranks with the spring statement and the level of support, or lack of it, from the Chancellor for those struggling to make ends meet. Well, let's get more on the mood in Westminster with our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, a few Tory rebels saying that the Chancellor just hasn't gone far enough and that the tax burden on the public just isn't right.
Certainly, this is not an easy time economically or politically, and this one thing flows from another. Back in January, of course, the Chancellor announced his support package for people dealing with energy bills. Of course, we know that energy bills are, with this price cap, changed in terms of the price cap once every 6 months. So the Chancellor didn't want to do anything with regard to energy bills up before October, the next time that the energy price cap will be reassessed, because we simply don't know where the global energy market is going to be by that point. Anything announced this week could be wildly out of date by the time the next changes come in. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that it's not just energy costs that people are concerned by and that have been massively affected by inflation. It's staples, it's food in particular, that is becoming a larger and larger proportion of people's spend. And so we've got this phenomenon in Westminster right now where a Chancellor who was once seen to be incredibly popular is now getting some potshots taken at him by people both on the left and the right of the Conservative Party. We expect the Labour Party to say that this isn't enough. But on the right of the Conservative Party, you have people like David Davis saying that there shouldn't be a national insurance raise at all, despite the fact that the threshold has been raised, so taking the lowest paid out of that tax altogether, the tax is still coming in. So people on the right of the Conservative Party are annoyed by that. And then some people on the left of the Conservative Party, like Peter Aldous, have been saying that universal credit should be expanded, that £20 uplift should come back in, so that there should be higher spending when it comes to benefits. So you've got this two-pronged attack from two sides of the Conservative Party. Is it going to turn into anything? Probably not, but it's the grumblings, it's the mumblings that start to matter. Although, it must be said, this isn't the last that we're hearing across government in terms of dealing with the cost of living. Just next week, we're expecting a new energy strategy, this greater energy independence strategy, to come forward. We've been told that will come out before the end of the month, and that might include some perhaps medium-term measures that might generate a greater degree of energy independence and help bring down some of those costs.
There are people saying that Rishi Sunak has given with one hand, taken with the other. He, of course, says his icon is Nigel Lawson, the Exchequer, Chancellor of the Exchequer under Margaret Thatcher. There are people saying, well, look, Thatcher would hate this. She sees that we should see working people struggling, the Treasury not doing enough to help them in that struggle, and at the same time increasing taxes. But what could he have done, given an unprecedented pandemic and then an unprecedented war?
Well, this is the argument of Rishi Sunak. Of course, he points to the fact that Margaret Thatcher, in her first couple of years in office, actually did raise taxes before that they were cut substantially. However, not to the degree that we're seeing now. And if you talk to a lot of economic experts around, they say that actually, to some extent, this Chancellor may be too worried about the short-term deficit, when one of the ways that we could best clear that deficit is by growing the economy and going hell for leather for growth. And you do that potentially by cutting some taxes, by taking a bigger short-term deficit, by adding a little more to our debt in the short term to grow the economy longer in the medium to long term, to then pay that back through growth rather than tax rises. This Chancellor seems to have taken the tax rise approach, and it's interesting. Listening to that statement earlier this week, the Chancellor said he listed all of those tax cuts one after the other, whether it was the raising of that threshold, that thing that will affect people most, or indeed that promise in 2024 to bring down income tax from 20p in a pound to 19p in a pound for those on the lowest threshold. Whether it was all of that, that is not looking at the taxes in the round. And there's this interesting graph in the ONS document, the independent OBR, I should say, Office for Budget Responsibility document that accompanied the Chancellor's plans. And that showed that, yes, while personal taxes may be going down in the next few years, taxes in the round are going up. Taxes on businesses are going up. Taxes in other areas are going up. And so the tax burden as a whole will be the largest since the 1940s.
There is, at one point, as you said, Rishi Sunak was one of the most popular figures in the Conservative Party. And this is the Conservative Party who, of course, said that they would level up and they want to appeal to those voters, the red wall voters, the traditionally working class voters who are likely to be hit by this cost of living the hardest. Is it possible that actually what Sunak is doing is holding back some fiscal firepower so that he can deploy that further down the line when it really matters to the Conservative Party, which is before elections?
He certainly is holding back some fiscal firepower. There is money that is not being spent right now. However, the Treasury would be at pains to say that the amount that we pay on our debt repayment interest payments has ballooned really, really high, tens of billions of pounds a year. And a change in interest rates, as we're expecting over the course of this year and the next, might well increase the amount we have to pay on servicing the debt we already have. So holding some of that fiscal firepower in reserve might be prudent just in case those interest rates demand that we need to pay back more, and a larger proportion of the debt of our budget needs to go on debt repayment. That's the uncertainty around this, and I think the watchword for so much of this is uncertainty. We don't know how long the crisis in Ukraine will go on for. We don't know whether or not OPEC will make different decisions in terms of pumping out more oil and gas for the global economy. We just don't know so many elements of where the global economy will be in even 6 months' time. So whilst Rishi Sunak was known for doing statement after statement at the start of COVID. You remember the first support package that was then superseded by the next one and the next one. I think likely what we're going to see in this time is this spring statement will be superseded later down the track, and this will not be the last we hear in terms of support for the British economy.
Tom, thank you ever so much. Well, we can now join... the cost of living crisis, is already putting lots of households under pressure, and there are fears that the rising cost of living will put increasing pressure on the nation's mental health, which is still, of course, fragile over COVID. Let's talk to Mark Brooks, policy advisor on male wellbeing. Financial pressures can hit people hard, Mark, and we often hear that when there is a cost of living crisis, you often get a spike in suicides as well. How worried should we be about the nation?
Well, we should be very worried about that. I mean, one of the things that, as you've said, is that whenever there's economic difficulties, there is a spike in male suicides, and often that comes about a year or two after. And we're already worried about that issue with regard to COVID and lockdown. So obviously, the continuing difficulties that we have in that respect, in terms of cost of living, we're really worried about the impact on that. Men, like women, in their jobs will be under more pressure to earn more money because obviously the cost of it costs more to live, pay the bills, will have to work longer. And also, I've spoke to some colleagues this morning and said that they're starting to see more men using food banks, for example. So when we're looking at the cost of living crisis, it's really important to think about the impact, obviously, on women, but also with men too, especially because we all share society and relationships and families together. So we shouldn't look at this in a very black and white scenario, which is often the case, that this is only an issue that affects women when it affects all of us.
Yeah, I mean, people often say that, the working classes are the proudest, and that perhaps with more traditional values, the men in families that are now going to struggle to make ends meet have a huge burden on their shoulders. What sort of advice might you give people out there today who are thinking, I'm really struggling, I don't know how to keep my family held together financially during this difficult period? And how would you encourage men to deal with those issues?
Well, I think the key thing is to make sure that any of the issues that's on their shoulders, to share that burden, obviously with their family, with their partners. They should be able to share that burden with them, because one of the issues for men in that scenario is they think they have to shoulder the whole burden. Also talk to friends and family not just obviously if there's any financial support, but just to let them know that they actually are struggling and need to basically have those people on their side and keep their spirits up, and always give people like that in that situation some form of hope and positivity to keep them going. You know, we are all in this together. It is a difficult situation, and we don't want any man or any woman thinking all of that responsibility is just theirs and theirs alone.
If someone's sitting at home watching this and they are themselves extremely worried about mounting bills, about how on earth they can get their food in, whether, you know, they have to forego the family holiday, perhaps they can't pay for their kids to go on a school trip when the rest of the class can. Is there anyone that they can turn to in the short term? Is there anywhere that they can go in order to try and get some support through this crisis?
Well, I think the government's put in some measures in terms of those on lower incomes with regard to their bills, but also every council will have on their website money advice services. So I would recommend that they actually go online if they can, or contact their councils, find where the money advice services are in their area and contact them. They're specifically funded to actually help people in those situations. So that's the message I would give. There is funding and organisations out there to help.
Mark, thank you ever so much for bringing into focus some of the stresses and strains that people are going to be facing over coming weeks and months. And if you are suffering, please don't suffer in silence. Try and find help. There are plenty of things out there that you might be able to access that can support you. Well, let's talk to my studio guest for the programme today, Charlie Peters, who is a columnist for Mail Plus. Charlie, fantastic to have you here. It's something that we don't talk about enough, is it? The pressure, the mental toll that is placed on people when they're struggling to make ends meet. And that affects both young and old, single people and families. How do you think people of your generation are going to be able to cope with this crisis? Because the focus is often on fathers, on families, a lot of talk about pensioners.
Always pensioners.
Always pensioners. But young people are actually going to have to bear a huge brunt of this as well, aren't they?
Yes, indeed. And young people will be looking at enormously depressing forecasts for economic growth over the coming decades. The country, in short, is poor, and it is becoming poorer. And nothing will change on this until we have a sort of radical economic policy that puts growth at the heart of our economic strategy. All too often, I think, Britain handles shocks, and we expect shocks, like the financial crash or the pandemic or the Euro crisis. But instead of reacting to these scenarios with a vision for expansion, we kind of do kind of old school Tory tinkering, where we think, well, let's move a little bit of a slice here, a slice there, a support package on top. What we need is more money. We need more growth, we need more business, we need to expand so that when bad times come along, we react with vigour. This doesn't happen, and I think young people will see that and think, well, what's the point?
Charlie, thank you ever so much. I want to know your thoughts on the cost of living crisis. How is it affecting you? If you've got testimonies and stories that you want to share, do let us know. You can email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or of course tweet us @gbnews. You are with GB News on TV and radio. We're heading to Northern Ireland shortly, where the row over EU border checks is raising its ugly head yet again. But first, it's time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon. Today, just like every other day this week, is dry for most, with sunny skies up and down the country, and it will feel warm in that sunshine with light winds under this area of high pressure, which is now centred across the UK. So very little airflow around that high. That means that under the sun, it will feel warm with temperatures well above average for the time of year. There is some cloud to speak of, mainly for Shetland, where a few outbreaks of rain are possible through the afternoon, light rain generally, and some patchy cloud affecting the coasts of Western Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. One or two clouds bubbling up elsewhere, but by and large it's essentially a sunny afternoon and temperatures doing well as well. 17, 18, perhaps 19 or 20 Celsius in some of the warmer spots. Now into the evening and clearing skies for most, and under those clear skies, one or two mist and fog patches will form here and there, but for the vast majority it stays clear. Now for the Northern Isles, we'll see that lingering cloud lowering to give some fog and some drizzle in places. In towns and cities, temperatures holding up, but in rural parts, they're dipping close to, if not just below freezing. So a fresh start to the weekend, but a beautiful start once again. Bright blue skies for the vast majority, barely a cloud in the sky for many away from the far north of Scotland, that is. And it will stay dry throughout Saturday, throughout Sunday as well. I think on Saturday night and into Sunday, there'll be a bit more cloud coming along. But on Saturday afternoon, those temperatures rising up to the mid to high teens once again, fairly widely under that sunshine. Now out in the North Sea, you can see some low cloud. That's going to start to creep closer to the east coast of the UK on Saturday night, perhaps giving a misty, foggy start for some on Sunday and bringing some cloud in for eastern parts of the country during the daytime, but it will stay dry.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
When is a border not a border? It's a question troubling the Northern Irish Secretary today, having successfully passed a law that will see non-Irish EU citizens having to apply for a visa waiver to enter the UK via Northern Ireland. But there will be no checks on people crossing the border in order to keep alive freedom of movement between the Republic and Northern Ireland as enshrined in the Good Friday Agreement. It's the latest complexity brought about by the Northern Irish Protocol since Brexit, with Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney calling the fact that Northern Ireland is part of the visa system regrettable. Yet quite how the UK will now check who is entering the country remains to be seen. Well, let's cross live to GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie, who is in Flurry Bridge on the Irish border. Dougie.
Good afternoon, welcome to sunny Flurry Bridge. I'm in the EU, 5 steps to my left, and I'm in the UK. There's no infrastructure here, everything is just flowing through, as you see behind me. This is how Ireland has been since, well, mid-90s, 1998, no border here at all, but it's always had the common travel area that's allowed Irish citizens to travel into the UK and vice versa. It helps business and it helps travel. We did peel back the story of P&O earlier on in the week, and we found that a lot of these lorries coming from Dublin ports were heading to British ports in Belfast and Larne in order to avoid checks, because checks now, EU checks, are 100% in place in Dublin, and they're only 30% in place in Northern Ireland, because we now have this border down the Irish Sea that unionists say is a total get out of the Good Friday Agreement because it doesn't allow for consent. It does away with Article 6, the Act of the Union. So Britain have been trying to stop immigrants and so forth coming into the UK. Quite rightly, they have put in extra border patrols and all inside the English Channel. So why would they leave a back door open through the Republic of Ireland so as those people could travel north into Britain and then travel back into England on a ferry? So that would mean that they would have to have checks in British ports on those from Northern Ireland coming into Britain. So British citizens being checked going into Britain. And those same British citizens in Northern Ireland, when going on holidays, have to be checked going into other parts of the EU as non-British citizens. It is totally confusing. And Simon Coveney has asked for, he is the Minister for Foreign Affairs here. He was tipped at one time to be the Taoiseach. He's Fine Gael's deputy leader. And he has asked for special arrangements to be put in place.
Could this be regarded perhaps as a bit of a negotiating tactic?
Well, you're probably right on that, because these special arrangements that he is asking for is exactly the type of stuff Lord Frost was asking for. He asked for this off Europe, and Ireland, of all people, were the ones that were so adamant that that was not going to happen. Now, Mary Lou McDonald, who's the leader of Sinn Féin, and they are the largest single party in the Republic of Ireland. They don't have a big enough party to form a government. It is a coalition between the Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil at this minute in time, has said that it's a breach of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, she is now crying the same as the unionists are crying in the north, and I would say that after the Ukraine situation has come down, Britain are starting to look at Northern Ireland in a different way, because it's only 3% of the population live in Northern Ireland, the UK population, but they supply about 20% of the food into Great Britain. And if we're trying to keep the cost of living down by keeping raw materials such as food low by buying your own stuff that's produced in Northern Ireland, well then Northern Ireland all of a sudden starts becoming valuable for what it does.
Now, in the last couple of hours, there have been reports, I believe, of a security threat and Simon Coveney having to be whisked off the stage at an address in North Belfast. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, this is a controlled explosion off the Crumlin Road. We believe it was probably about a couple of hours ago. We do have 2 or 3 of these a month. Most of them are small devices, pipe bombs, and they're usually down to sort of gangsterism more than paramilitaries. The threat in Northern Ireland has come down to substantial from severe, and that is because the police force here reckon that they have got the better of the dissident Republicans, those that were involved in the shootings of Lear and McKay, etc., in Derry over the last few months, and they are confident that this is not going to happen. So I am watching to find out, was this actually an undercar device? Was this something that was a real bomb, or was it more of an aggressive threat against another gang?
Boogie, thank you ever so much. Remind us of the bad old days there, so let's hope that things do not escalate. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. In the next half hour, we're going to be getting the latest on Ukraine and talking again about rising energy costs and how we can diversify our energy supply. But now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Thank you, Alex. It's 2:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. President Joe Biden has announced a joint game plan between the US and the EU that will reduce Europe's dependency on Russian energy. As part of the plan, the US will provide the EU with at least 15 billion additional cubic metres of liquefied natural gas by the end of the year. The Irish Foreign Minister was removed from stage in Belfast mid-speech earlier after a suspicious device was found in a hijacked van in the venue's car park. It's reported the van's driver was held at gunpoint. Simon Coveney says he's saddened and frustrated by the incident. Coronavirus infections have risen sharply across most of the UK, with over 4.25 million people likely to have had the infection last week. The steep rise is being driven by the Omicron BA.2 variant, a more transmissible form of Omicron. Northern Ireland's the only nation where infections are believed to be falling. In Wales, the legal requirement to wear a face covering in shops and on public transport will end on Monday, as well as self-isolation after a positive COVID test. All legal restrictions were set to be removed, but First Minister Mark Drakeford says rising transmission and hospitalisations means some have to stay. The boss of dairy giant Arla says the price of a pint of milk is likely to go up as farmers struggle with rising costs of feed, fertiliser and fuel. In the last 10 years, consumer prices have gone up 26%, whereas the cost of milk has dropped by 7%. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to We Need to Talk About with Alex in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Alex Phillips on GB News. Now, he hasn't minced his words since Russia rolled tanks over the border and began a bloodthirsty bombardment of his nation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed the European Council, calling out states that failed to back him and slamming EU sanctions as too little, too late, arguing that Germany's greed for gas not only enabled Putin, but triggered the energy crisis now gripping the continent. But full marks go to former USSR satellite states in Scandinavia. But conspicuous by their absence are many of the richer Western nations who never lived behind the Iron Curtain, other than Germany, whose relationship with the Kremlin has been hideously exposed. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has slammed Britain for giving tanks to Ukraine. Yet France used loopholes to dodge EU sanctions and sold 152 million euros of military kit to Moscow. You fast learn who your real friends are in a crisis. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, politicians once on opposite sides are united in brave defence of their country, old animosities cast aside. But joining me now is Yaroslav Urash, Ukraine's youngest member of parliament and a member of President Volodymyr Zelensky's Servant of the People Party, and also Ukrainian lawyer and opposition MP Lysia Vasilenko. Lysia, let's start with you. I understand you sent your 3 children away to safety and decided to stay behind and fight. That must have been a heart-wrenching decision as a mother.
That was the only decision that I could make. I gave my children life to live, and I want them to live it to the full, meaning that I will not allow Putin to steal their childhood from them. So despite the choice being hard, and despite the fact that I haven't seen them for the longest time now, that was the only reasonable choice to make. And I actually urge right now all civilians who are not taking up arms and who are not fighting to get out of the densely populated cities across Ukraine, because to be frank, in the war zone, civilians are always a liability, because the army then needs to take care of the people, of the civilians, rather than doing their main job, that is fighting the enemy and killing the enemy.
And how many other women like you have decided to stay back at home and take up arms? Because a lot of the caravan of people fleeing for their safety are understandably women and children.
A lot of women are taking their children to safety, and this is a job in itself, and this is their contribution to the defense and security of Ukraine. A lot of the women are staying back and fighting. Today, the Ukrainian army is composed of 15% of women. The same goes for the territorial defense units. A lot of women have taken up arms and joined their local community defense units, standing shoulder to shoulder with the men protecting their land. It all depends on A, what your skill set is, what you know, whether you know how to use a weapon, whether you had practice of how to use it, and B, of your readiness and what you are prepared to do for your country. I think that at this time, there's no judgment. Whoever is doing whatever, as long as it's for the benefit of Ukraine, are heroes in Ukraine. Really, what we see now is freedom being forged under the fire of missiles being shot from Russia over Ukraine. And what we see, the second thing, is a nation of superheroes being formed and united in these days of war.
Yeah, Yaroslav, I mean, you are a nation of superheroes. It's remarkable. Just a month ago, you and Lysia would have been opposite sides of a chamber, disagreeing with each other politically. Now you find yourselves essentially standing shoulder to shoulder for the defence of your nation. What has that last month been like for you?
Well, there's no other choice. The reality is our nation is attacked as a whole. Putin has very clearly laid out his goals in a speech he made a week before the full-scale offensive began, and the reality that we are basically fighting for everything. We cherish everything that is dear and near, and in this fight there is no opposition, there is no government, everybody is joined in. The reality is there's a reason why every single vote in the parliament now is passed with 300 votes, so constitutional majority. That is basically unity like you've never seen it before. And as far as the fight is concerned, I mean, Kiev was a frontline city from day one. They were trying to storm Kiev from the beginning, but they've been repulsed by the efforts of citizens that essentially have taken up arms straight away to show the Russians their place outside of our country. And the point is, for myself and other members of parliament, we've been given a chance to receive the weapons on day one and join the battle. I, since that point, joined Territorial Defense Force, but the reality is bringing various supplies, various needs to various units around Kiev and preparing the defenses as much as we can for whatever Russians throw at us is the goal right now.
And in terms of whether you think life will ever go back to normal, it must have been an incredibly long month. Your president once again calling on EU countries to do more. Do you feel like there's progress? Do you feel like Russia's being pushed back and you can see light at the end of the tunnel? Is it just feel like an interminable hell for you?
Well, it's very clear that in the month that passed us by, the motivation has moved from defiance to the fact that we all have lost dearly in this war, and we all lost people that we knew either to fighting or fleeing or suffering in this battle of ours, and there's a reason to try and seek justice right now in the fight that is going on. So the point is, we are united in our defiance, in the clarity of the goal here as never before, and for that reason I'm sure history is the best guide to what happens. That is, we shall persevere against the despot who thinks he can defy the whole world.
Lysia, it's remarkable speaking to you both. I mean, Ukrainians have been such an inspiration to the rest of the world as we look at politicians, ordinary people fighting for their nation. Is there a red line? Is there a cut-off point at which point you would decide this is enough, I need to leave, I need to get back to my children?
That's a good question. You know, I have honestly not looked at it from that point of view. I mean, Ukraine, the whole nation, the army, we are fighting for our right to exist in this world, and not just to exist, but also to live as a free nation and as an independent state. So with that being said, it's really a fight, a battle until the very last Russian in Ukrainian territory. And we are giving our all to this. Every morning we wake up with the same thought, okay, what else can I do to keep Ukraine going, to keep Ukraine standing as an independent state? All the other thoughts, they are sort of secondary. So once I have established a safe place for myself and for my family, for my children, that is it. The whole focus has shifted. But you're asking a very painful question, but a very important one at that. I mean, the goal will be, in the worst case scenario, the goal will be for the Ukrainian parliament and for the Ukrainian government to retain its legitimacy, so that the decision making in the country can continue to be made, whether from inside the country or from outside the country. We're now talking about contingency plans for governments or parliaments in exile. This is a possibility which is discussed by very, very few people in the country for security reasons, but it is being discussed in case of a worst case scenario. But for us ordinary parliamentarians and for the ordinary people, it's still something. It's a contingency plan. It's very far off from where we are now. And at this point in time, we are confident that we still have control over most of the cities in Ukraine, and we are confident that with that control, we can do a lot to push the Russians out from Ukraine.
And finally, Yaroslav, I mean, I just want the two of you to sort of speak to each other, because at one point you were rivals politically, and now you find yourself in this exceptional circumstance with your world turned upside down. Do you have messages of support for each other to keep each other's sort of will and determination alive?
Well, the reality is Ukraine is always united by the need to reform and change in the European direction to bring us closer to those institutions that we are striving to in the West. So the point here, our rivalry, if that was ever the case, was political and in terms of choosing different sides of political battle. But the goal was the same, to bring Ukraine forward to the Western world institutions and structures and alliances. So the point here is, I'm glad that both in parliamentary work that is now complemented by the efforts that we are doing here in Kiev. And back to your question about Kiev, I mean, you can see very clearly what happens when vital cities are sieged by the Russians. So Mariupol right now is that example, and we are standing there to the last. So Kiev is the capital of our country, the source of our statehood, the source of our history. So we cannot give up that city, and fleeing here is something that is unacceptable, not just for parliamentarians, but for the president and the entire leadership of the country. We are staying here, we will defend this town till the last.
Yeah, and Lysia, any final word from you?
Yeah, so I don't think that we were ever like rivals with Sviatoslav in any case. I shouldn't like to think so, but I must say that I'm actually very happy to see him, albeit on the same screen, because we haven't seen each other. Well, actually, no, we saw each other yesterday in Parliament. So we had a parliamentary sitting, and it's always such a delight, you know, when we see our colleagues, when we have the opportunity to hug each other, to just stand next to each other, to say a few kind words. The energy and the inspiration coming from each other, from wherever we are in Ukraine right now, it's what keeps Parliament going, and it's what keeps the nation going in reality. So I would just like to say to every single Ukrainian, and Yaroslav included, just keep safe. and keep fighting. And united we stand, and Ukraine will prevail. And Slava Ukraini.
Yaroslav,
Amen.
extremely moving. You are both remarkable. Thank you so much. It's been an honour having you on the programme.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's go back to Charlie Peters. I'm moved. I mean, it's just incredible thinking of these politicians who a month ago were just working opposite sides of the fence, but in the interest of their country are now fighting to save their country. Can they? How do you see things going forwards?
Right, I think the unity we've just seen on the screen is not only reflected in Parliament, but indeed throughout the country. It was a disunited nation, Ukraine, and now the way they can possibly march towards victory is through the unity they have rediscovered. Not only the unity, but also the enormous amount of weaponry that has been sent to Ukraine by NATO supporters. This will be a way forward. Now, there is, I think, an increasing level of optimism about the Ukrainian situation based on a slowing advance towards Kiev from Russian forces, a struggle in the east, Mariupol, referenced there by one of those MPs, another heavy attritional bombardment. But we have to caution this optimism to some degree, because while the Russians haven't taken Kiev in a blazing advance as they expected, they are going through something of a strategic reset right now. They've lost a ginormous number of their forces, a significant blow in terms of manpower and tanks and artillery. So I think, rather depressingly, the scenes that we've seen in Mariupol of artillery bombardments, schools, homes, hospitals blown up and destroyed, that is likely to be replicated throughout the other key areas of national infrastructure that Russia is targeting.
Now, you talk about the need for Ukraine to get more tanks, and Britain indeed is sending more tanks. President Zelensky saying to European nations, we asked for 1% of all of your tanks, just 1%, please give them to us. And yet what's going on with Emmanuel Macron? He seems to say that Britain sending those tanks, those extremely important heavy artillery to Ukraine, is crossing a red line.
Yeah, well, I mean, these are warnings that Vladimir Putin has set, not that Macron has set. And so he is, in many ways, giving up to the Kremlin's propaganda line himself, rather than taking a more, I would say, NATO-centric view or Ukraine-supporting view. Now, what's the difference between sending 6,000 anti-tank guided missiles and an additional piece of hardware? Not very much. So I can't see Russia reacting more severely to us updating or improving our supplies of weaponry based on what we've already done. I mean, this clearly works and it needs to happen.
Yeah, Western European states rather failing, one might say, in their duty to help protect their neighbour and ally, Ukraine. Well, NATO has never been more united. Those were the words of President Joe Biden as he continues his tour of Europe to shore up solidarity over war in Ukraine. He's also won a big contract for America to sell liquefied natural gas to a continent struggling to wean itself off Russian fuel. The American president is on his way to the Polish-Ukraine border, where American troops are based, following a diplomatic ding-dong over who would supply fighter jets to Kiev. Both sides seemingly nervous about handling the hot potato amidst threats of Russian reprisals. Biden has also reaffirmed that NATO would respond if Putin resorted to using chemical weapons. But are transatlantic threats and a stranglehold on Russian imports enough to bleed Putin's campaign dry? And with that little nutter Kim Jong-un now parading his own WMD in a strange slow-mo propaganda video, is America able to lead the West once again in fighting off dangerous seismic shifts in the world order? Well, who better to talk to than Mike Hewitt, who's former Rear Admiral in the US Navy and co-founder and CEO of Allied Nuclear and its parent company, IP3, an expert both on American military strategy and energy security. Mike, let's begin first of all with this big deal between the US and Europe to supply liquefied natural gas. I mean, some might say, why hasn't this happened previously? How far is that going to go in order to lift the continent out of a crisis and prevent money from going back into the Russian system and funding Putin's campaign?
Well, Alex, thanks for having me. I think of all the things they decided yesterday at NATO, this may be the one that actually makes a difference. But as you said, too little, too late in our kind of climate change-led agenda by which we decided that natural gas and other fossil fuel resources were not appropriate for Europe, and we decarbonized these countries when they needed this power. This is really an energy fight. And I think at least allowing LNG at a stable price for a long-term commitment. It has to be one that's subsidized to national security, but we have to guarantee a stable supply of LNG to these countries if, in fact, we're going to ask them to wean themselves off of Gazprom.
Now, people are looking at the West and they see that it perhaps has been in decline, that it's been divided, it's been sloppy when it comes to geopolitics. And everyone was very critical of Joe Biden, saying he's not the strongman Trump is, and perhaps this wouldn't have happened if Trump was still in power. But we are now seeing tensions escalating all over the place. You've had China buzzing Taiwanese airspace. You've got Kim Jong-un firing his big missiles. Is America now ready to lead the West once again in preventing this new world order, this sort of banditry, international banditry and aggression from escalating?
Well, as you and I have talked about for quite a while, and we really started talking about this when we abandoned Afghanistan, really to the surprise of our allies and the Afghani government, is that we sent a clear signal of what we won't do. And we sent a clear signal of what I consider to be weakness by us and our allies. And when you send that kind of signal, you invite the actions of China over Taiwan, and frankly, invited the actions of Putin in Ukraine.
It looks like we've just lost connection to Mike there, but that's okay. We can go back to Charlie Peters. Now, Charlie, it's interesting, isn't it? What Ukraine has exposed is quite how flawed Western policy has been. It hasn't been conjoined. It's potentially been myopic, despite these existential geopolitical threats emerging everywhere. Is Ukraine the tragic wake-up call that the West needs? And do you think that we're in a position to restore that unity? Biden there saying NATO is more united than ever, but these constant petty ructions going on with Germany, with France against the UK.
Yes, well, I think Ukraine should be the wake-up call. I mean, many people are soaring their pride recently are admitting that Donald Trump was right when he lectured European nations and saying the US cannot defend the world. It no longer wants to spend the lives of its young men and women, and indeed trillions of its dollars, to secure your nation. And I don't think that Europeans responded as they should when the president made that warning, a very legitimate warning, I think. Defence spending throughout the continent is pathetic. The United Kingdom and France are basically the only two countries in Western Europe, and indeed the European side of NATO, that believe in defending themselves. And even then, their contributions are pretty paltry. So Germany is an embarrassment in its defence and indeed relies very much on Russian energy. So.
Yeah, former Defence Minister of Germany, Ursula von der Leyen, now, of course, President of the European Commission. There are big schism in the EU itself, isn't there, between the Eastern European nations, who Zelensky, in his address to the European Council, said, well done, thank you for supporting us, and those in the West who, well, they seem to have been a little bit close to Putin, a little bit too worried about their own economies to really stand in solidarity with Kiev.
Well, there's an energy situation there, which you rightly raised, but also Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, all of these countries fear a possible invasion from Putin. So we have rightly sent military support to these nations, and we should learn, as they learn from our military skills and drills, we should learn from their geopolitical temerity and their strength of character, which I think is sorely lacking throughout the west of Europe. And indeed, the energy situation is a ginormous crisis. The European Commission has, thankfully, at the beginning of this month, introduced a policy to wean itself off Russian gas by the end of the decade at the latest. But as the Admiral said before we lost him, too little, too late.
Yeah.
For decades, we have known that we're relying far too much on Russian energy. And as he says, this is a transition now that was being inspired by climate change-related concerns. It should be driven by wanting to feed, house, and warm the homes of your own nation.
Yeah, too little, too late. Indeed, the words also of Volodymyr Zelensky. That's about it for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News. Same time, same place, next week, 2 o'clock. Coming up next, it's the briefing with Tom Harwood. But first, it's time for the weather forecast. Let's hope it's going to be a sunny weekend. Bye-bye from me.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. Today, just like every other day this week, is and it will feel warm in that sunshine with light winds under this area of high pressure, which is now centred across the UK. So very little airflow around that high. That means that under the sun, it will feel warm with temperatures well above average for the time of year. There is some cloud to speak of, mainly for Shetland, where a few outbreaks of rain are possible through the afternoon, light rain generally, and some patchy cloud affecting the coasts of Western Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. 1 or 2 clouds bubbling up elsewhere, but by and large it's essentially a sunny afternoon and temperatures doing well as well. 17, 18, perhaps 19 or 20 Celsius in some of the warmer spots. Now into the evening and clearing skies for most, and under those clear skies, 1 or 2 mist and fog patches will form here and there, but for the vast majority it stays clear. Now for the Northern Isles, we'll see that lingering cloud lowering to give some fog and some drizzle in places. In towns and cities, temperatures holding up, but in rural parts they're dipping close to, if not just below freezing. So a fresh start to the weekend, but a beautiful start once again. Bright blue skies for the vast majority, barely a cloud in the sky for many away from the far north of Scotland, that is. And it will stay dry throughout Saturday, throughout Sunday as well. I think on Saturday night and into Sunday there'll be a bit more cloud coming along, but on Saturday afternoon, those temperatures rising up to the mid to high teens once again, fairly widely under that sunshine. Now out in the North Sea, you can see some low cloud. That's